Hi everyone, and welcome to this free Ornament Girl tutorial. My name is Kennedy, and today I'll be showing you how to make the elegant egg ornament pattern. Before we get started, make sure you check out the link below the video to download your free printable coloring sheet to help you plan the colors for your ornament, as well as your free printable supply list. As you can see, there are lots of different styles you can do with this pattern. I have a very glamorous, glitzy gold one, and then I've also made more of a country style, classic pastel Easter egg, and today in the video I'll be making one with pink fabric and embellishments that falls sort of in between. So even though this is a pretty simple pattern, you can really spruce it up and make it whatever style you like. In order to complete this pattern, you'll need a soft foam egg divided into 8 sections, satin straight pins, fabric, trim, and embellishments in the colors you'd like to use for your ornament, a piece of hanger string, fabric scissors, a flexible tape measure, and a pen for marking your foam. Make sure you check out the free printable supply list for all of the correct measurements and quantities. Before we add any fabric to your ornament, we'll first need to make some marks on our foam. In this pattern, the narrower end of your egg will always be referred to as the top, and as you can see, my soft foam egg from the Ornament Girl shop is pre-divided into 8 sections. If your foam egg isn't already divided with 8 segment lines, you can check out our video on how to divide an egg into 8 segments. Let's start at the pole marking at the top of your egg. This is the point at the very top, the narrower end of the egg where all of your lines converge. Line up the end of your flexible tape measure along that pole marking where all of those lines are meeting up, and bring the edge of your tape measure down along one of those segment lines on your foam. Along this segment line, make a tiny mark at the 1 3/4 inch mark. So again, that's 1 3/4 from the pole marking at the top of the egg. Go around to each segment line on your foam and make this same mark 1 3/4 down from the pole marking. Once you've made a mark on each of the 8 segment lines, 1 3/4 inches from that top pole marking, you are now going to use the edge of your tape measure at a straight edge and connect 2 of those marks across the foam. Continue this between each segment line so that you have a line running all the way around the egg at that 1 3/4 inch mark. Once all of your lines are connected, flip your egg over so that you're now working with the bottom pole marking. As you can see here, mine is the Ornament Girl logo. And again, we will repeat that same process. So measuring from that pole marking along each of your 8 segment lines, make a mark at the 1 3/4 inch mark and repeat that for all 8 segment lines. Once you've marked all 8 segment lines, again use your flexible tape measure to connect each of these marks so that you have a line running all the way around that bottom section of the foam. Once you've connected all of those marks, now your egg is divided into 8 segments around and 3 sections running from top to bottom. Now you're ready to add some fabric. With a 2.5 by 5 inch rectangle of fabric number 1, hold this piece horizontally with the patterned side facing away from you and fold it in half crosswise, like a book, and crease that center fold. Returning to your foam, lay this folded piece centered across that center section between the 2 lines drawn on your egg, so you're just making sure you have the same amount of fabric above and below those drawn lines, and the folded edge of your fabric will be lined up right against one of these segment lines on your foam. Once that fabric is in place, Pin along the left edge, keeping your pin along the segment line and the line that you drew on the foam. Pin this at the top and bottom drawn line. Now smooth your fabric out over to the right, but be careful, you don't want to pull it hard enough that your folded edge starts to curve and isn't in line with that segment line anymore. So you just want to be really gentle, smoothing that over, trying to keep it centered within that segment. And now you'll pin along the right edge, again pinning along those drawn lines. You'll be pinning past the segment line though, so you're pinning right along the edge of the fabric, keeping your pins on those drawn lines. Having these pins a little to the right of the segment line will help us cover them up in a couple of steps. And now you'll also pin along this center segment line. So this piece of fabric is covering 2 segments. Along this middle segment line, you'll just gently smooth your fabric up from the center and place a pin along the segment line and along the line drawn on the foam. And if you need to peel your fabric back a little to see where your drawn line is, you can always do that. This will help us keep our pins evenly spaced, which will help us keep our trim evenly spaced when we make diamonds as well. And now at that bottom drawn line, I'm again along my segment line, just smoothing my fabric up from the center and placing a pin along the segment line and along the line I drew on the foam. Let's prep another piece. With another rectangle of fabric number 1, hold this with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in half with your folded edge on the left. And now we are going to line this up to cover the raw edges of the piece we previously placed. So along this segment line that is just to the left of those raw edges from my first piece, I'm just laying this new panel on the egg centered in that middle section and keeping this folded edge aligned with the segment line on my foam. Of course, pinning along the segment line and making sure my pin is along the line I drew on the foam at the top and at the bottom. Just peel that back there to make sure my pin is along that line. Gently smooth your fabric over to the right, pin along the raw edge at those drawn lines. And now at that middle segment line, just gently smooth your fabric up from the middle and pin along the segment line and the line you drew on the foam at the top and the bottom of the piece. Repeat that step one more time, adding another piece to the right of the piece you just placed. And now, before adding your final piece to cover these last 2 segments, unpin the left folded edge of the first piece that you placed on the foam and gently fold it out of the way. This will allow us to hide our raw edges under that piece. If you want to hold it out of the way with a temporary pin, you can go ahead and do that. And now add your final section of fabric just the same way as we did with the previous pieces. And once your final piece is added, go ahead and fold the left side of your first piece back into place. Pin it along the segment line and the line you drew on the foam. Now that we have the whole center section covered, we are going to pin down some of these raw edges and smooth out the bulk of our fabric. The trick here is that these pins that we have placed are going to help us lay out our trim in the upcoming step. So we want to make sure that these pins we're adding now don't blend in with these pins we've already placed. So we want to make sure we're placing them at the top and bottom raw edges far enough away that we can tell where our marker pins are when we're placing our foam. To smooth out the bulk of the fabric, gently press your finger up from the middle of that band and toward the raw edge, and place a pin in the center of each segment on the foam. So I'm just pinning at my top raw edge there within that segment, and I'm going to go and do that all the way around the top of the egg. Once you've added those 8 pins to the top raw edge, flip your egg over and do the same at the bottom raw edge, smoothing the fabric out and pinning along the raw edge at the center of each segment. And now we'll place a couple more pins between all of those along the raw edges to smooth out our bulk some more. So in each segment, I'll just add one more pin to the left and right side of the pins I've already placed. So here at the top of the egg, I'm smoothing that fabric out to the left and to the right of the pin already placed and pinning along the raw edge. And I'll do that in every segment. You might get a little bit of rippling up here, but that's okay as long as you're smoothing your fabric out evenly and not pushing all of that bulk into one side or one section. Repeat this around the top and the bottom of the egg. You can see how that pin line looks around that top raw edge, and now I'm just going to do that same step for the bottom. At that bottom raw edge, since the sections are a little wider, if you want to add a couple extra pins, maybe 2 to the left and right, you could do that as well if you wanted. Once you've smoothed out and pinned down those top and bottom raw edges, we can add the trim across the center section, which really makes up the beautiful style of this ornament. To do this, you're going to first locate one of your top pins. We're using these pins that are closer to the center, so not the top pin line that we just used to pin down those raw edges, but these spread out pins along the segment lines and the lines that we drew. First, find one of these top pins that doesn't fall along a fabric fold. So here I have my fabric fold, so I'm just moving to the right to one of these top pins here along that drawn line. And you'll need a 25-inch piece of a thinner trim. I'm using a sequin trim here. And you're just going to line the end of your trim up with that pin that we just located. Again, making sure this doesn't fall along one of those fabric folds. Now bring your trim down to the right across the ornament, but you're skipping one segment line. So you're crossing over this fabric fold and aiming for this next bottom right pin here that doesn't fall along a fabric fold, and go ahead and pin that in place. Now bring your trim up to the right, again crossing over this fabric fold and landing at this next top right pin here. Pin in place. And now bring your trim back down to the right. You can see our sort of zigzag pattern forming here. You're crossing over a fabric fold and aiming for this next bottom pin. Pin in place and turn up to the right, and now we have returned back to where we started. You'll just pin your trim in place again. Now trim off this long piece left over, and we're going to do that one more time, zigzagging the opposite way with our remaining piece. So here's where we just started. I'm just moving to the pin directly below that and pinning the end of my trim there at that pin. And now moving up to the right. So we're crossing over the trim that we already placed, and this crossover should be happening over top one of our folded edges of fabric there. Aim for that top pin and pin in place, and continue this same zigzag pattern all the way around until you return to where you started, making sure that the crossover falls on those folded edges of fabric. Once you return to the starting point, you'll just lay that trim across, pin it in place at the same point, and trim off the extra. Now you can see we've made these diamond shapes on the center band of our ornament. You can straighten these out by gently moving the trim around, and you want to make sure where the two pieces of trim cross over each other, that center falls along these fabric folds. So you can nudge those into place, and if your trim is tending to move out of place, once you get those crossovers to the point where you want them, you can even place a pin at that very center point to keep them from moving around. All right, now we've got our first pieces of trim added. Now we're going to add some trim to cover up these center folds and those pins where our pieces are crossing. So with 3-inch pieces of trim, these can be the same trim or they can even be a different trim if you want to mix and match. You are going to lay this trim across the band, covering up the fabric fold and the pins at the center of that cross. So you'll just pin it up here outside of the edge of the band, and we will cover that up later. So you can pin right there, just keeping it straight and covering up those folds and the pins that we added. Repeat this for all 4 sections. Once all 4 of those vertical pieces of trim are added, we can now move on to adding fabric at the top and bottom sections of our egg. These sections will be made up of basic triangles using our 2 by 3 inch rectangles of fabric number 2. Hold one of your rectangles horizontally with the pattern side facing away from you and fold the top edge over by about 1/4 of an inch. Fold this piece in half crosswise and crease to find the center. Unfold and pin along this center crease right below that top folded edge. Returning to your ornament, find the pole marking at the top of your egg. Along one of these segment lines that lines up with the vertical pieces of trim, pin your piece right into the pole marking right along that segment line. Now center your center crease with that segment line. And now we'll make a basic triangle. Fold the left side straight down, and now fold the right side straight down, just overlapping the left, enough that you could place a pin and pin through both layers. Place a pin along the center. You want to stay about 1/4 of an inch or so up from the bottom edge. We want to make sure to leave ourselves enough room to add a couple more layers here. So I didn't place it all the way down at the bottom. I'm about 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edges of my center band. Smooth the left side of your triangle and pin along the left edge, again staying above those raw edges of your band by about 1/4 of an inch, and smooth out to the right and do the same. Let's repeat that. Hold another rectangle of fabric number 2 with the pattern side facing away from you. Fold the top edge over by about 1/4 of an inch. Fold in half and crease to find the center. Unfold and place a pin along the center crease just a hair below the top folded edge. This is how you'll prep all of your pieces for your basic triangles. Returning to your ornament, move directly across from the triangle you just placed and pin this again directly into the pole marking. Fold the left side straight down and the right side straight down, making sure the center line of your triangle is in line with the segment line and the trim on your foam. Now pin through both layers about 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edges of our band. Smooth out the left side and pin, smooth out the right side and pin, And now you'll repeat these steps 2 more times to add another triangle to these remaining 2 segments. Once all 4 triangles are added to the top of your egg, you can go around and trim off the excess fabric that falls below the pins holding those triangles down. When you're cutting, be extremely careful that the tips of your scissors don't go underneath your trim pieces because you don't want to accidentally cut those off. Once that extra fabric is carefully trimmed away, we can add our next set of triangles. Prep another piece of fabric number 2, the same as you did before. Returning to your ornament, these next 4 basic triangles will fall right on top of the triangles you already placed. So I'm returning to one of my triangles here. This is the center line of a triangle I already placed. And measuring from the pole marking where all of my lines and the tips of those triangles converge, I'm going to pin right on top of this triangle 1/2 inch away from the pole marking. So I'm pushing my pin in at the 1/2 inch mark along the center line of that triangle. And now complete your triangle the exact same way, folding the left and right sides straight down, overlapping them just slightly, and making sure that center line is straight with the trim below. With this layer, we will be placing our pins a little bit lower. When we add another piece of trim to our ornament in the upcoming steps, we want the pins from our triangles and the pins from the points of our diamonds to be able to be covered with all the same piece of trim. So I'm placing my pin at the center of my triangle, pretty much in line with the point of my trim diamond over here. And same with the left and right sides. Pinning right at the points of our diamonds. This will help us use one piece of trim to cover them all later, and you can even lay your trim across your ornament just to make sure it's actually wide enough to cover the pins from your triangles and your diamonds all in one piece. Prep another piece of fabric number 2. And now moving directly to the right of the triangle I just placed, I'm measuring down along the center line of my next triangle. Measure from your pole marking and pin your piece along that center line of the triangle underneath, right at the 1/2 inch mark, and complete your basic triangle. And now remember, when you pin at the bottom center, you're keeping your pins pretty much in line with the point of the diamonds you formed with your trim across your center band. Repeat this step 2 more times to add another triangle on top of each triangle from the first layer, making sure your center line lines up with your vertical trim pieces and placing your pins in line with the points of your diamonds made by your trim. Make sure you're always pinning 1/2 inch away from the pole marking. Once you've added all 4 triangles, go ahead and trim off the excess fabric, again being extremely careful not to accidentally snip off any of the trim pieces. Once that fabric is trimmed off, we will add one more set of basic triangles to the top of your egg. So go ahead and prep another piece. And these final 4 triangles will be pinned in between the triangles you already placed. So in between these 2 triangles that we placed in our previous layer, measure down from the pole marking along that line between triangles and pin your prepped piece at the 3/4 inch mark. So these tips will sit just a little bit below the triangles we previously placed. Complete your basic triangle. And now the center of your triangle should line up with one of your trim diamonds here. So we are again making sure that we keep our pins pretty much in line with the pins we previously placed and the points of our diamonds. Same with the left and right sides. Prep another piece. And moving directly to the right of the triangle you just placed, we are falling between 2 triangles from the previous layer, centered with one of our diamonds here, measuring down from the pole marking, and pinning our piece at the 3/4 inch mark. Complete your basic triangle, making sure that the center is lined up with the center of your diamond and keeping your pins in line with the tips of your diamonds made by your trim. Repeat that process to add a triangle in those remaining 2 spaces between the triangles from the previous layer. Always make sure you're measuring down from the pole marking and pinning along the 3/4 inch mark. Once all 4 triangles of your 3rd layer are placed, go around and trim off the excess fabric, being very careful not to accidentally snip any of your trim pieces. Once all of that excess fabric is trimmed off, that top section of your egg is finished. To cover the bottom section, you will simply flip your egg around and repeat that exact same process. So you'll do 4 basic triangles lined up with these vertical pieces of trim. Then on top of those, 4 more basic triangles pinned 1/2 inch down from the pole marking. And for your final set, 4 more basic triangles falling between those previous triangles, lined up with your diamonds and pinned 3/4 inch from the top center. Make sure that your bottom pin line is lining up with the tips of your diamonds so that when you trim in a straight line all the way around, you'll be able to use a piece of trim at the end to cover all of those raw edges and pins, along with the pins at the tips of your diamonds. Once you have added 3 layers of basic triangles to the bottom of your egg and trimmed off the excess fabric, we are ready to trim and embellish to finish up your ornament. So using your piece of trim number 3, this should be about 3/8 of an inch wide. Mine's a little bit thinner. With thicker trim, you'll have an easier time covering all of your raw edges and pins. But to start off, you will just line up this trim over the raw edges and pins between the band and the basic triangles at the top of your egg and pin that in place and gently wrap this all the way around, covering up those raw edges. Like I said, I have a couple pins showing here because my trim is a little bit thin, but I'm going to add some beads at the points of those diamonds anyway to help cover that up. Once you wrap all the way around and return to your starting point, go ahead and pin that trim in place again. And cut off the extra. And now use this remaining piece to do the same along the bottom edge. And when you return to where you started, pin in place and trim. Once your whole egg is covered, now comes the most fun part, which is adding embellishments to your ornament to really give it the style that you want it to have. I will show you how I'm embellishing mine, but you can feel free to decorate yours however you'd like. To start, I have threaded a pin with a dark pink bead and a pink flower sequin, and I'll be pinning this at the center of each of my diamond shapes formed on my egg. So I'm just going to move that one up a little bit, but in each of these 4 diamond shapes you can pin one main embellishment, and I'll repeat that for all 4 diamonds. And now at the tips of my diamonds I'm going to pin more dark pink beads. Just right there at the bottom and top points of my diamonds to help cover up any pins that might still be showing and help hold my trim in place. Adding embellishments to your ornament is really fun because this is where you get to really make it unique and have as much bling as you want. And there's so many different patterns and ways that you could come up with to add these beads and sequins and other embellishments to your ornament as well. Once I've added all of those to the points of my diamonds, I'm also going to add them to these points where they cross to really bring out that diamond shape with my 4 dark pink beads. Alright, I think I'm happy with the embellishments in the center section of my ornament. Like I said, you can add as many or as few embellishments as you want to change up the style. To cover the bottom of my ornament, I've threaded a pin with a pink bead and a bead cap, and I'm just pinning that right into the pole marking where all of my triangles meet. That just gives it a nice finished look. And now at the top of my ornament, I'll do the same and add my hanger. With a 10-inch piece of hanger string, put the ends together and tie a knot. I've threaded another pin with a pink bead and a silver bead cap, and now just press that pin right through the knot on your hanger string. And pin this into the top center of your ornament, covering up any of those corners that might be showing or uneven and giving you a perfect way to hang your ornament. Now your elegant egg ornament is finished. As you can see, there are so many different styles that you can do with this pattern. It comes together quickly, but you really can change it up. I have a really glitzy, glamorous gold one here, the pink one that we just made together, and with my green one, I kept my embellishments simple and used less sparkly fabrics and trims to give it more of that classic Easter pastel look. We're so looking forward to seeing all of the beautiful Easter eggs that you make from this pattern. Please feel free to tag us or send us photos of your ornaments, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.